Welcome back! Now that you know how much traffic you're getting, it's time to find out what country they're coming from and which country that's the most valuable. Now, this is essential knowledge since you may be getting a lot of traffic from one country, but another country may be giving you much higher quality traffic. Then you'll want to put your marketing efforts towards the high quality traffic. Now, similarly, great marketing is all about building connections, and different countries have different cultures, so you need to speak the language of your most valuable website visitor. Alright, let's dive in and find out where they're coming from and which is high and which is low quality traffic. We're going to start off by going into audience, remember, because we're looking at our audience right now. Before, how we acquire them, and now specifically about our audience. So click on audience and open that up, go down to geo, open that up, and then click on location. Now, if we scroll down, we're going to be getting a lot of very important and useful data country by country. And once again, this data reflects your date range that you have set up here. If it's on 7 days currently, then make sure that you have at least the last 30 days. Okay, and then click on apply. And then let's scroll down once again. Now, we've gone through a lot of these, what users are, new users, what a session is, what a bounce rate is, etc. Now, let's use a lot of this information and knowledge and look at the different countries and see how they're performing differently and how we would adapt our marketing strategies based on the data that we're getting. Now, on the very top, we can see that the majority of users are coming from the United States. If we look to the right here of the user amount, we get a percentage. 42.9% of all the users comes from the US, okay? And we're having some pretty great statistics as well. They got a low bounce rate, they have a lot of pages per session, and they like to stay on the site for a long time. And check this out, they're generating a lot of revenue. So no surprise that Google's main targeted audience is people from the US. But here's where it gets really interesting. If you look at the country which has the second most amount of users, that is people from India. Okay, so they account for 8.7%, almost 8.8% of all of the people. And they have a lot more people coming from India than from Canada. But this is where we start separating high from low quality traffic, because we have to ask, what is the purpose of the website? Of course, it is to generate revenue. So if we go to the right and we look at how much revenue is India, the second most popular traffic that's coming to the site, generating. We go all the way to the right and we can see that they're generating 0.1% of the revenue, $186.8. That's not a lot of revenue being generated from the second most popular traffic that you're getting, determined by country. But if we go down, we can see that we have about 1,400, something like that, less people coming from Canada, okay? So quite a bit less coming from Canada. But if we look to the right, we can see that Canada still stands for 5.2% of all of the revenue. So while India, or people from India, are generating $186, people from Canada in total have generated $9,947,000. There's a huge difference in between here. And the only reason that we know of this valuable data is because that Google has enabled something known as e-commerce tracking. So they're tracking the revenue being generated. And we are going to do that for your own analytics as well later on in the course. But this is super valuable because if you look on the surface, you're going to think, well, we're getting a lot of people from India. That's great. We're gonna, adapt our marketing language. We're going to try to get even more people from India since they seem to like us. And they do. They have a good bounce rate. They have a better bounce rate than Canada do. And they also like to stay on the site for a long time, 2 minutes on average. But they don't like to buy their stuff. And that is super valuable because if you're running an e-commerce, you want to be selling stuff. And if you aren't selling, well, then this is going to be a low quality traffic country for you. So instead, of course, you want to focus on the US because 91.8% of the revenue comes from the US, but you also want to know that Canada is very valuable for you because they're generating a lot of revenue as well. So this is the process of understanding what a high versus a low quality traffic is. And now we're looking at countries, but this is important because in India, they have separate cultures. And if you were generating a lot of revenue from India, you would adapt to that sort of marketing language towards that country. But now it would be a very poor idea to do so since Canada and the UK are producing a lot better results if you're looking at the revenue than India is doing, despite getting a lot of traffic from India. Now, if you want to go even deeper or even more in depth of, okay, we know that the majority is coming from the US, but where in the US are they coming from? Maybe you would like to do some form of ads, or you just want to use a specific language because you have a specific targeting. You can click on the United States here. And now we're getting some more data once again. So if we look at the different states, we can see that California is, representing the majority of users. They're also representing the majority of revenue being made. So if you were to make a marketing plan and you were going to go specifically towards a state, clearly you would want to target California, since they are producing a lot better results than any state down here, such as Pennsylvania, for example. But if we look a little deeper on some of the other states in here, we can see how they're actually performing versus each other. If we look at Texas and Washington, for example, we can see that Texas is more popular than Washington is, because 7.2% of all of the users come from Texas and only 4.4% comes from Washington, okay? We can also say that Texas is generating more revenue than Washington is, but you have to understand that almost double, not quite, but almost double the amount of people are coming from Texas. But we're not seeing almost double the amount of revenue being generated. In fact, we're seeing almost an identical amount of revenue being generated by these two. So 7.2 versus 4.4 when it comes to the actual amount of users, but only 6.8 versus 5.9 when it comes to the actual revenue being generated. So what does this mean? Well, it means that Washington, even though you're getting less users from there, actually generates more money in total per user than Texas does. So if you were to choose one of these states to focus on, because you're making a wide marketing plan and you want to include California, New York, the top 3 states, then you would want to include Washington rather than Texas. We have to understand that these have different cultures as well. And if you're doing any form of ads, then you want to be very specific in your state's targeting, then go for Washington over Texas. So this way we can get a lot of very deep information. We can also see that the bounce rate is much, much better for Washington compared to Texas, which has a quite high bounce rate, and also there are more pages per session. So there's a lot of in-depth valuable data that you can gather if you just look a little closer and don't just take the surface value. Of course, more users and more money being generated makes it seem like Texas is more valuable, but if you look at the actual percentages, we can see that Washington indeed is more valuable. So if we go back and we summarize, what we want to look at is the revenue being generated, and we're going to set this up for your Google Analytics account later on in the course. But this is how you separate high quality traffic from lower quality traffic. If you are running an e-commerce, you're looking at the revenue being generated. But if you are running a blog or you're relying on ads, for example, then you want to look at the average session duration primarily and pages per session, because the more pages you're showing and the longer they're staying, the more ads you can show and the more revenue you can generate from there, and also build up your brand and actually build something. Okay, so if you run an e-commerce, you look at the revenue. If you're running a blog, or if you're trying to build a brand reputation or something similar, then you're going to look at the average session duration and pages per session and let that determine what is a high quality traffic, what is low quality traffic. And of course, don't forget your bounce rate. It should be as low as possible. Now, in the next lecture, we're going to go and look at your audience's demographics to understand who they really are, so that you can be really specific with your marketing language to really target in that high quality traffic that you've got. Okay, see you in the next lecture.